Have you ever stopped to think that World War II, one of the biggest military operations in human history, was almost destroyed by a weather forecast? Not bombs, not tanks, not Hitler, the weather. And that's exactly what makes the 2026 historical thriller Pressure so fascinating. Because this movie takes one of the most famous events ever, D-Day, and asks a terrifying question. What if the fate of the free world came down to a few men arguing over clouds, wind speeds, and barometric pressure? And honestly, that's what makes this story absolutely nerve-shredding. So today, we're breaking down Pressure, the movie, the real history behind it, the hidden scientific war that almost changed the outcome of World War II, and why this film feels shockingly relevant in today's world. And trust me, by the end of this video, you may never look at a weather forecast the same way again. Most World War II movies focus on the battlefield. You've got explosions, massive invasions, heroic charges through gunfire. But Pressure does something completely different. Instead of showing soldiers storming Normandy for 2 hours, the movie traps us inside a tense British war room just days before D-Day. No bullets, no action spectacle, just maps, scientists, military commanders, and one terrifying realization. If they get the weather wrong, thousands of men will die. And somehow, director Anthony Morris turns that into one of the most intense historical thrillers in years. Here's the crazy part. This entire story is based on a real historical fact. Years after World War II, former President Dwight D. Eisenhower reportedly joked to JFK that the Allies won D-Day because they had better meteorologists than the Germans. Think about that. One of the most important invasions in human history may have succeeded because of weather scientists. That's not Hollywood fiction. That actually happened. And Pressure builds its entire story around that terrifying reality.
Now here's where things get insanely complicated. D-Day couldn't happen on just any random day. The Allies needed a full moon for airborne troops, low tide so soldiers could see German beach traps, calm enough seas for landing crafts, clear skies for air support, controlled wind conditions, perfect timing at dawn. Basically, nature had to cooperate perfectly. And remember, this was 1944. No satellites, no advanced radar, no supercomputers. Forecasting the weather back then was basically educated guesswork mixed with raw human interpretation. One wrong prediction, and the invasion could become a massacre. Now imagine carrying that responsibility. And this is where the movie becomes truly gripping. At the center of Pressure is a massive clash between two meteorologists. On one side, James Stagg, played by Andrew Scott. Quiet, reserved, obsessed with data. On the other, Irving Krick, played by Chris Messina. Confident, charismatic, absolutely convinced he's right. And these two men represent completely different ways of understanding science itself. Krick believes weather follows repeating historical patterns. Basically, if conditions look like this before, they'll behave the same way again. And honestly, that method worked pretty well in places like North Africa. So Krick confidently tells military leaders, launch the invasion. The weather will hold. But Stagg sees something terrifying forming over the Atlantic. A massive storm system, and he warns if we invade now, this could end in catastrophe. So suddenly, Eisenhower faces an impossible choice. Listen to the optimistic forecast everyone wants to hear, or trust the gloomy scientist telling him the operation could collapse. And this is where the movie starts feeling less like history and more like a psychological thriller. But here's where the story gets even crazier. The movie actually simplifies the real history. Because the real meteorological battle behind D-Day was even messier, more political, and way more personal than the film shows. And once you hear what was left out, you'll understand why historians still debate this story today. One of the biggest omissions is Norwegian meteorologist Sverre Pedersen. Most people have never heard his name, but historically, he may have been one of the key reasons D-Day succeeded. Pedersen tracked storm systems forming over the Atlantic and realized the weather was becoming dangerously unstable. His charts basically confirmed that the June 5 invasion window was too risky. And even more importantly, he helped identify the tiny weather gap on June 6 that ultimately saved the operation. That tiny opening, that became D-Day. Without it, history could have looked very different. But for storytelling purposes, the film mostly combines several scientists into Andrew Scott's character, James Stagg. And honestly, it makes sense dramatically. Because Pressure isn't trying to be a documentary. It's trying to capture the emotional weight of making impossible decisions under pressure. No pun intended. Now let's talk about one of the smartest choices the filmmakers made. The movie opens with Exercise Tiger. Most people don't even know this happened. It was basically a D-Day rehearsal, and it went horribly wrong. Hundreds of American troops died during the exercise because of confusion, friendly fire, and German attacks. And the film uses this disaster brilliantly, because suddenly the fear becomes real. This isn't theoretical anymore. Everyone in that war room understands if they fail during the real invasion, the death toll could be catastrophic. So every weather report suddenly feels like life or death, and that tension carries through the entire film. Now let's be honest, a movie about weather forecasts sounds incredibly boring on paper, but the cast completely sells it. Andrew Scott is phenomenal here. He plays Stagg with this quiet exhaustion, like a man carrying the weight of thousands of lives on his shoulders. And Brendan Fraser as Eisenhower? Honestly, one of the best parts of the film. Instead of portraying Eisenhower like some untouchable military legend, Fraser plays him like a deeply stressed human being trying not to collapse under pressure. There's a moment where he basically admits, "When I close my eyes, all I see is failure." And that line hits hard, because the movie constantly reminds us these weren't superheroes, these were human beings gambling with history.
And real quick, I want to hear from you. Do you think you would have delayed D-Day based purely on uncertain scientific predictions, or would you have launched the invasion anyway? Let me know in the comments, because honestly, that decision feels impossible, even today. What really surprised critics was how suspenseful the movie becomes without traditional action. Most of the tension comes from arguments over weather charts, tiny changes in air pressure, people interpreting incomplete information, military leaders losing patience, scientists trying to convince powerful men to listen to politicians. And weirdly, it works, because the movie understands something really important. Sometimes the scariest moments in history happen before the battle starts. Cinematographer Jamie D. Ramsey also makes a fascinating choice. Most World War II movies use dull gray colors, but pressure looks rich and vibrant. The countryside is beautiful. The sunlight looks warm. Everything outside seems calm, which makes the approaching invisible storm even more unsettling. And James Stagg constantly stands out visually in his bright blue shirt, while everyone else wears military browns and greens. It subtly reminds us he doesn't belong in this world of generals and war machines. He's a scientist surrounded by men obsessed with momentum.
The score by Volker Bertelmann is another huge reason the tension works. The music doesn't sound heroic. It sounds anxious, uneasy, like something terrible is slowly approaching. The strings twist and swirl almost like an actual storm system forming over the ocean. And by the final act, you genuinely feel the atmospheric pressure building. Now, to be fair, not everything works. A lot of critics felt the movie weakened itself with unnecessary personal drama involving Stagg's pregnant wife. And honestly, I kind of get the criticism, because the stakes are already massive. This is literally the fate of World War II. So adding extra domestic melodrama sometimes feels unnecessary compared to the incredible procedural tension happening in the war room. Still, when the movie focuses purely on science, leadership, and decision-making, that's when it becomes truly excellent. But here's why pressure really matters beyond World War II history. At its core, this movie is about something incredibly modern. What happens when scientific evidence clashes with political momentum? Think about it. The military leaders want the invasion to happen. Everything is already moving. Millions of moving parts are in motion. And then scientists come in saying, "Stop, the data says this could fail." Sound familiar? That same conflict exists today with climate change, pandemics, environmental disasters, public policy, global crises. The film basically argues that true leadership means having the courage to stop and listen to uncomfortable facts, even when everyone around you wants to charge forward. And honestly, that's probably why this story resonates so strongly in 2026. Eventually, Eisenhower makes the call. Delay the invasion from June 5th to June 6th. And historically, that decision may have saved the Allied invasion force from total disaster. Because if they had waited even longer after that, they would have collided with one of the worst storms ever recorded in the English Channel. Think about how insane that is. History itself may have hinged on a tiny weather window, a few hours, a few forecasts, a few scientists. That's terrifying and kinda unbelievable. Pressure succeeds because it reminds us that history isn't always shaped by the loudest voices or the biggest explosions. Sometimes history changes because one exhausted scientist refuses to ignore the data. And honestly, that may be the most relevant WW2 story Hollywood could tell right now. So, if you enjoyed this breakdown and want more deep dives into movies, hidden history, and the true stories behind Hollywood films, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and drop a like because it seriously helps the channel grow. And let me know in the comments, what's your favorite historical thriller that doesn't rely on non-stop action? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.